Hello, good afternoon or good morning or whenever you're looking at this video. Today I am here to talk to you about pollinators. And pollinators are the creatures like birds and insects, bees, sometimes even small mammals like mice or bats. They are going to be taking pollen from one flower, to another. And when they do that, they're getting into the parts of the flower with the pollen, and it spreads it to another flower that takes the pollen in to essentially make the fruit of the plant, which then in the fruit, of course, has the seeds to grow new plants. So pollinators are very important. They're part of a relationship which is symbiotic. So got a couple of these words written down here. So pollinators, sorry, I've got a little glare. Pollinators are the creatures that are going to be taking pollen from plants, either to the same plant or to different plants to help make the fruit. And then that relationship that the pollinators and the plants have it's called a symbiotic relationship because they help each other out, and it's a mutualistic, there's another good word there, mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Wow, these are some big words. I love big words, especially big scientific words. So pollinators are the animals, the insects or the birds or the small mammals that are going to take the pollen and move it around the plant, the same plant or the same tree, or to a different plant or tree to help make the fruit of the plant. And that way, the pollen gets distributed and the plant gets to grow and thrive. And that way, the animals, the pollinators, they get to have food, they get to have homes in those plants or in those trees. And so they really take care of each other. Without one, we wouldn't have the other. And so that is a very important relationship. And so, of course, as the weather is warming up and we are starting to see plants are starting to blossom, and we're starting to see a few more insects as those honeybees, especially those honeybees, they take very good care of us. They, by pollinating as much as they do, not only do they give us honey, they are giving us lots of fruits and vegetables that we eat. And without them, we wouldn't have all those fruits and vegetables. So that's a very important relationship, not just for the animals and the plants, but for us. And I was just outside a little bit earlier, and I took a picture of one of our first foods for our pollinators, especially our bees. You probably have seen bees, dandelions. People sometimes don't like those growing in their yard because they are technically weeds. I guess a weed could really be anything that you don't want growing where it is, but those dandelions are really important first food for the bees that are beginning to come out of their long winter where they have been in their hive, and now they're starting to come out and they'll be looking for food. They're very hungry, and so they're going to start distributing that pollen along with the other butterflies that we'll start seeing, or moths, birds that are coming back from their migration. So all of that is going to be taking place right now. So the animals need the plants for shelter and for food. They might be getting nesting materials. They might be building a nest right in that plant. And then remember, the plants are going to be needing those pollinators to disperse the pollen. So, does anybody remember what that special relationship is called? It's called a symbiotic relationship, and it's mutualistic, meaning they mutually help each other out. And they help us out as well, because of course then we get to eat the apples or the tomatoes. Think about what other fruits and vegetables you might like to enjoy, and thankfully we have pollinators to help make that happen. So I'm going to talk now a little bit more about the flower where those pollinators are going to go, and then in a future video, I'll talk a little bit more about the pollinators. So the kinds of plants that have flowers, because of course not all plants have flowers, but plants that do have flowers are classified as angiosperms. That is another awesome big scientific word, angiosperms. So angiosperms are flowering plants, and I have a blank piece of paper, so this is going to be your activity for today, is to draw the parts of a flower. And some of you maybe have done something similar in the class. I'm going to do a little bit more detail of the inside. I'm going to pretend to, I don't have an actual flower here, but I'm going to pretend to take the flower and cut it directly in half. That's called a cross section. So I'm going to pretend to cut that flower in half, so it's going to look a little bit different. You may have a different style. Oh, you know what? I can put this right down here. So first part is I am drawing the first part of the plant, the very inside. So remember, I've cut it in half, and this part of the plant, stick with green, is the female reproductive part of the plant. And this is called, this whole big section is called, the pistil. And inside we have the ovary, and this part is the style. And up here, where this part is pointing, is called the stigma. So this is the female part of the plant. Did you know that a plant has female and male parts? Now you do. Oop. All right, so first I've drawn the very, very inside. So what's going to happen is the pollen is going to end up going in here and traveling down, and then that's where the fruit is going to come from. And then we have these parts over here that are going to stick up out of the flower, and they're going to have a top part. There's going to be a few of them. I'm really picturing like lilies having this very clearly, or if you look at an apple blossom or a cherry blossom. So, and then this is going to have the pollen. I'm going to make some little dots for the pollen up here. Okay, maybe instead of labeling it with a color, I will label it with this black. So that's going to be the pollen that those pollinators are going to want to go after. This part right here is called the anther. And this little part that kind of makes this top part dance, because this part's a little bit heavy, that's the filament. And that part of the plant is all called the stamen. And that is the male part of the plant. Okay? Maybe I should have stuck to labeling all of my parts in one color. But you can decide. You'll be the artist of your scientific drawing. I also might recommend drawing it first in pencil and then adding this part. Now, you might be thinking, Heather, that does not really look like a flower at all. We've got a lot of labeled parts here. All right, well now I'm going to take my new color here. And remember, this is going to be a flower cut in half. You might want to even draw the whole thing before you label it. These are going to be my petals. The petals are also called the corolla. Okay, I'm going to do one more petal down here. So these petals, you can think about them having a little bit of color. So these are corolla, which is also what we know as the petal. Okay, I switched, I didn't label it in black. Oh well. You get the idea, corolla. I was trying to do colors for the flower and then labeling it in the black just to make it kind of stand out. Okay. And the flowers are generally going to be really bright colors because, do you have any ideas about why the flowers are bright colors like they are? They are going to want to attract those pollinators. Like, hey, come over here. I've got some great nectar for you. Come on in. So that's how they would attract. Now, we have this part down here, which is at the bottom of your flower, which if before the flower opens up, the bud is going to be here, and it's going to be closed up tight in this darker part right here. So this part is called the sepal. And this part, you know, is going to be the stem. That's going to be rigid. It's going to be holding up the flower, giving it support. Okay. And then, of course, on my diagram, I'm also going to want to write parts, very squeaky marker, of a flower. Scientific drawings are going to have labels. Okay. So there's your title parts of a flower. We've got the female part of the flower here, which is called the pistil. It has an ovary and the style and the stigma. So when the pollen comes from the male part from another flower, from another plant, or sometimes the same plant, the bird, let's say a hummingbird, flies in. It's going to be drinking the nectar from down in here, and it's going to brush up against this pollen. It's going to get on its body. So when it travels to another flower, it's going to drop and deposit the pollen here back into this stigma part, and it's going to travel down, and this is where the fruit, so if this was, let's say, a tomato plant, which tomato plants do not have pink flowers, but let's pretend, then what the fruit of the tomato would grow from here. The petals would drop off, and slowly a little round green fruit would form, and it would slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then of course it would ripen into a beautiful red, which would have its seeds in it that you could then plant, or sometimes it could just plant itself and grow another tomato. So those are the parts of a flower. And so that is your activity today. I can post my picture here, but you could also just do your own search to find a little bit more about it. And you can remember that plants that have flowers are called, does anybody remember? Angiosperms. Angiosperms. And the relationship between the pollinators and the plants are going to be symbiotic, mutualistic, symbiotic relationship. Okay, so thank you for joining me today. Keep your eyes out for pollinators in your neighborhood, and you can be thinking about the flowering plants. And I will be back next week with another video having to do more with pollinators. So I hope you all have a lovely day. Take care.